news of Babita Deokaran. The Gauteng Health Department says it has no record of an official request for a forensic investigation by Deokaran. Now, of course, we all know that's despite an investigation by News 24 that showed the whistleblower did flag suspicious payments by Tembisa Hospital to the department's now suspended financial officer, Lerato Madio. Let's bring in to the conversation investigative journalist working on the story from News 24, well-known Jeff Wicks. Jeff, good to have you on eNCA. I appreciate it. And this simply can't be a grey area. Either there was a request and there was an investigation, or there wasn't. So it seems the MEC thinks that this never took place.
Yeah, Gareth, well, it's going to be very difficult for the Gauteng Department of Health's executive administration to wriggle out of this. And if I understand the MEC correctly, the central thrust of her response is that Deokaran never formally reported this. And what we have in our possession is a 4-page PDF in which she reports this and calls for an urgent investigation into the payments out of Tembisa Hospital and the companies that received them. So then we must ask, what is formal, and how formal does it have to be for our Gauteng health administrators to act? Because it's worth bearing in mind that this is no small amount of money. And what our investigation has shown so far, that there are red flags around the companies that pocketed millions for the provision of medical goods and services, which was fundamentally illegal. These companies exist only on paper, and we're all trading in medical goods without relevant licenses, which, number one, renders the expenditure wasteful and fruitless, and it also represents a criminal offence.
We also saw Jack Bloom, the DA's Jack Bloom, firing questions off as well. And I just want to quote it here because it's exactly what you're talking about, Jeff. What is formal? What is regarded as a formal investigation and a formal request? And he says here to the MEC, I didn't ask for an official report. I asked for a request. I asked whether there was a request or observation made by Deokaran. And I suppose this is exactly what the investigation is now going to try and unpack. I mean, it's been almost a year. Surely there were WhatsApp messages or emails. There must have been some kind of trail. And it beggars belief how the department thinks there wasn't any concern at all.
It does beg a belief, and it's been more than a year now, Gareth, and that's the reality. What we have found, and that's going through thousands of Department of Health emails and the contents of Babita Deokaran's cell phone, is that she reported this matter formally to Lerato Madio on the 4th of August. On the 12th of August, they spoke on WhatsApp, and Babita spoke again about the report that she filed and also concerns for her safety. And that's why this investigation that we're seeing now, even though it's belated, is so important, because these administrators in the Gauteng Department of Health need to face a reckoning, and they need to account for what they did and what they failed to do. And as some might argue is more important, we need to understand where this money went and how much money was channeled to these companies which have no presence other than a bank account and a SIPC registration. So there are a range of red flags at Tembisa, not only with regard to what Babita Deokaran reported before she died, but we need to understand what's happened since. And again, this is why this SIU investigation now will become so critical.
And what's important as well, apart from that element being critical as well, is there's almost a contradiction here, isn't there? It's almost taking a step back and backtracking on what was said, because according to the investigation, I've read parts of what you've investigated, is that just weeks before her murder, that we had the now suspended chief financial officer acknowledging that there were concerns raised and that they would be escalated. Again, we're hearing one version, which has now got the complete opposite of what we heard yesterday.
Yes, well, it seems like a fair amount of political chicanery going on. And my read on the situation is that everyone in the health department now wants to put distance between themselves and this scandal. But what we've been able to conclusively prove is that Madio was aware of this from the 4th of August, perhaps even the 3rd. And what we know is that the detailed investigation that Babita Deokaran called for was cast aside. And what the health department did instead is instructive. They never launched a forensic probe into Tembisa Hospital specifically, and over 1,200 transactions that she flagged. The panacea for them was to institute a randomized compliance audit to look for holes in their SCM procurement processes at all facilities in the province. We've been able to tell you that there are serious problems at Tembisa, and had they only looked then, they would have found exactly what we have.
What happens with this next, though, Jeff? I mean, these investigations are being done, and many people are lauding yourself and News 24, of course, but these are investigations that should have been done by official structures, but here you are doing their work for them. What do you, as a journalist and an organisation, do with this? What's the hope that this is going to change?
Well, for us, Gareth, all we need to do is take this information, put it through our journalistic rigors and push it into the public domain and hope that someone actually does something. And that's the great tragedy in this, is that it took a year and it took our exposés to force some sort of action, but it is buoying that that action is now being taken. What we will continue to do is to delve into these companies and the payments they received and expose what needs to be exposed. We've got other stories in the pipeline that will be dropping soon, and every time we look at these payments and the companies that received them, it beggars belief that this was not picked up sooner.
Yeah. And just as a last question for you, Jeff, as well, moving away from the investigation itself, this is exactly what we've all been talking about in news and journalism, is the moment that whistleblowers don't feel safe, we're going to lose this kind of information. Without these whistleblowers, we wouldn't have had things like state capture. And in exactly what you're referring to in the investigation, was raised, concerns were raised, and it was still ignored. It doesn't say much for whistleblower safety in our country, does it?
No, not at all. And this is one of the things that will be impossible for us to measure, is how many whistleblowers, seeing the treatment that Babita Deokaran received before her death and since it, will now decide to stay silent, and how much corruption will go unreported. Whistleblowers are incredibly important in our democracy, and that's been codified by the Chief Justice in his state capture reports. And Babita Deokaran was one of those whistleblowers who was failed by the system.
And keeping it very much in the public eye, as he does all the time. Jeff Wicks, I appreciate your time. News 24 investigative journalist Jeff Wicks joining us here on the South African Morning.